Hi, my name is Cassandra. I am doing my presentation on domestic violence with an emphasis against women. The domestic violence definition, this is taken directly from the U.S. Department of Justice. It says domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. Abuse can show up in many ways, including physical, mental or emotional, sexual, psychological, and economical. It can also show up in many other different ways. Some hotlines. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, the number is 800-799-SAFE or 7233, or another number is 800-787 3224. The National Center for Victims of Crime, the phone number is 855-4-VICTIM, or the phone number is 855-484-2846. And those phone numbers are taken directly from the U.S. Department of Justice. Who typically experiences domestic violence? Anyone can experience abuse or violence within an intimate relationship, regardless of age, race, or gender. Women are typically more likely to experience domestic violence in a romantic relationship, but men do experience it as well. Some statistics I found, over 47% of women have encountered contact, sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. 85% of domestic violence victims are women. By 2019, nearly 4 women were murdered daily by intimate partners, and nearly 1 in 2 women in the United States will face physical violence from an intimate partner at some point in their lives. These are my interview questions with Sonia Delaney, a former DCFS employee. How would you handle or talk to a client who is the one being abusive in a relationship or at home? Sonia said when they would go out on domestic violence calls after an incident had happened, they would always take police with them for support and safety. She said they always talk to the victim and the aggressor separately and not together, because the aggressors are always very manipulative and controlling, and in order to get any sort of accurate information from the victim, you have to separate them. Sonia said that oftentimes when they would go out on calls, the aggressor or perpetrator would already be in jail, so they didn't always have to talk to or deal with them directly on a call. If they do have to talk to the aggressor, she said they just try to keep it about safety and laws and just say they're trying to keep everyone involved safe. One thing I found really interesting is that she told me that couples in domestic violence relationships often should not do marriage or combined counseling until it is deemed safe by the therapist. The aggressor should also not do any sort of anger management counseling, and that they need to attend a domestic violence specific counseling. What would you say to someone who tells you that they were or are being abused in a relationship at home? Sonia said on all the calls she went on, it's all about making sure the victims, who is most often a woman, feels safe and knows her resources. She said they always took a folder full of information for the victim that had resources on things like shelters and therapy places, etc. One of the things they use on calls is something called a lethality assessment that they have to do with the victim that gauges and helps determine how dangerous the situation is. The social worker can also help the victim to fill out a protective order as well, so that is something that they have to do on their own. She said it's super important that you don't leave the folder of information with the resources with the victim unless the victim says it is safe to do so. Oftentimes, leaving the folder of information with the victim can make their situation worse once you leave them and the aggressor comes back into the home. How are you able to separate your personal feelings and stay professional when a client is talking about difficult topics such as domestic violence and abuse? Staying professional isn't the hard part, but separating your feelings can be. One thing that Sonia said that has helped her to separate her feelings is just by having a lot of practice and also have a really good support system at work. Because this field is so confidential and you have to keep it at work, having a good support system at work and being able to talk through and debrief everything with the people you work with is very important. She also said that self-care is very important and being able to just go home and take care of yourself in whatever way you feel is best for you. One important thing to note is that you will feel so many emotions during some of these tough and crazy cases, but you just have to hold in your emotions and stay professional until after you can debrief with your teammates and supervisors. You can have empathy while still being strong for your clients and victims you help. What protocols do you have to follow as a social worker when a client reports domestic violence or any kinds of abuse? Reporting any kinds of domestic violence or abuse is age specific, according to Sonia. She says that for adult abuse victims, reporting and getting help is all voluntary unless for some reason it is court ordered. Utah is a mandatory reporting state, so if anyone has any knowledge of a child being abused, they must legally report it. Abuse of a child in any form such as physical, emotional, sexual, or neglect, and it must be reported to DCFS, which is Department of Child and Family Services. Since Utah is a mandatory reporting state, that means that all police, medical staff, educators of any kind, or any sort of therapist must report known or suspected abuse of a child. Sonia said that any regular person in Utah is also mandated to report as well, not just a professional. Reports can be done anonymously, but ultimately do need to be reported. DCFS will then decide if there's enough to open up a case. Does each agency have different protocols on reporting rules? Yes, each agency has different rules and protocols on reporting. Sonia said where she currently works, you report by telling the counselor and administrator, and then the counselor and administrator report it formally to DCFS. Sometimes, though, protocols may be different, and you may be the one that has to report it directly to DCFS. She said the most important thing is just to make sure it gets reported if it is a child, and ultimately it's on the person who knows about the abuse to make sure the report gets filed. Where is the best place to find resources to give your clients who are experiencing abuse in some way? Fortunately, there are a lot of good resources to give victims who are experiencing abuse. Some resources that Sonia gave me are victim advocates, domestic violence shelters, counseling, DCFS, hotlines, police stations, courts, Safe Utah app, etc. She also said that Utah has a very active domestic violence coalition that provides resources for victims. She told me that we have quite a few domestic violence shelters here close to us available for victims, including one called South Valley Sanctuary in West Jordan, Utah. She said often the locations of the domestic violence shelters are not disclosed, but this shelter's location is. Victims can go into the shelters themselves, or a caseworker or victim advocate can help get them in there as well. What is your best advice for an aspiring social worker? Sonia said her best advice for an aspiring social workers would be to first volunteer or intern in the social work field if it's something that you're really interested in. She said that one, it is the best way to get your foot in the door and get to know people and make connections that way. And two, it's also the best way to know that if this is something that you can really handle before you go through all of the schooling and licensing. Sonia said another piece of advice is to be prepared for lots of schooling. She said you usually have to get at least a bachelor's degree, if not usually a master's degree in social work. By interning or volunteering, you are able to find out if this field is really meant for you and if you can handle all the hard work of school and hard work of cases. Her last piece of advice is to make sure you have a really good support system in the people you work with and have a really good self-care system. Here's just some pros and cons of social work that I think. Working in the social field is already tough enough, especially when you are working with cases like domestic abuse and other tough situations. Some of the cons and challenges of working in the social work field include things like having to work with difficult and upsetting cases, having to learn how to separate your personal feelings, and the possibility of getting burnt out by working really quickly due to the magnitude of everything. Um, However, even though there are a lot of challenges, there are a lot of pros that can come along with social work. One of the biggest positive to me is that social work is such a big field and you can work in so many different aspects of it. Another positive is that you get to help people and be a positive in their life and be someone who helps them through a really tough situation. Just some counseling agencies. Most counseling agencies offer services towards domestic violence victims and possibly even offer it towards the aggressors seeking domestic violence treatment as well. The social worker's responsibility of these counseling agencies is to listen, provide resources and advice, report if necessary, and be a support system and safe space for the victims. The beginning salary for a licensed social worker in Utah is around $60,000, according to just a Google search. Um, Boundaries are very important with any client and should always be followed with any counseling agency. Anything that should be reported needs to be reported, and all respectful boundaries should be kept on both therapist and client ends. And then here's just some concluding thoughts. Social work is an exciting but can be very stressful field of work. My interview with Sonia opened up my eyes to a lot of things and gave me not only new information, but also provided me with resources that I feel like I can share to those around me when I feel as though someone is in a tough situation. I now know how to get into this field of social work by first looking at interning or volunteering and seeing if this is the right fit for me before doing anything else. Helping people is important, but isn't for everyone, and you need to have a solid support system in order to make it through the social work field. It's important to know what to provide to victims on domestic violence calls and what to leave with them and the resources to provide to them so they know how to continue to get the help once you leave them. And here's my references.